Hi, everyone. I'm Jessel Noor of Solutions Journalism Network, and this is the Knight Center for America's course, A Better Way to Cover Elections, Campaign Reporting that Centers Communities and Solutions. So far in this module, we've reviewed the reporting framework called Solutions Journalism. We've talked about why it's a necessary corrective to the media's overemphasis on problem-focused reporting, and the best practices for integrating it into reporting beats and workflows during this election season. Well, now we're joined by Hugo Balta. He's the publisher of Latino News Network. Thanks so much for joining us, Hugo.
Thank you very much for having me.
So followers of the Knight Center may recall the Solutions Journalism course you led last year, which was a critical success. Now you're working on a Spanish language version and doing a lot of work in the space, giving people the understanding they need to report on not just the problem, but the solutions, especially in this election year. Talk about what you're working on now, what you're thinking about now, and obviously we're in the midst of this high stakes election. Journalists are under a lot of pressure this year. Where are you looking for creative energy and for people to for journalists specifically to be spending their time and effort?
Yeah, absolutely. I think I was very fortunate, and it takes a village, right, to produce those types of webinars. We produced a MOOC, as you mentioned, last year that was very popular. I believe nearly 3,000 participants over nearly 40 countries, and it speaks a lot to the interest of solutions journalism and the alternative that it brings to negative news, and not necessarily that you're focused, as we preach at SJN, that you're focused on telling a good feel story, but you're looking to do better about the responses to the social problems that many communities are plagued with. And now I'm working on a Spanish language version based on the popularity of that MOOC, and of course pivoting because there are certain needs given Latin America, so the southern continent, Central America, and of course the United States and Mexico, and there are different needs in regards to news coverage and how solutions journalism is used. So I'm very fortunate and very happy to be able to work with others in producing that Spanish language MOOC. To your question, in this election year, there's a great opportunity to integrate solutions journalism into the daily coverage of right now. Everybody's knee deep in the primaries and of course the general election in November. And for me, what I ask of our reporters, our journalists, as well as other colleagues, is to apply those four pillars in not only producing a solutions journalism story, but using those four pillars in the whole process, from ideation, when you're doing your research, when you're pitching your stories, as well as when you're deciding who's going to tell the story, how are you going to package it, and what platform are you going to use to reach the audiences. I think it's always a best foot forward when you apply those pillars. But in this election year, as it happens every 4 years, every 2 years, if you include the midterms, you're talking about the voters and you're talking about what's driving them to the polls. And there are common threads, especially the social determinants of health. It's the economy, it's education, it's public safety, and others. And it's not good enough just to throw, a statistic in regards to a poll that was recently released. It's really about diving into those issues and going to different communities and saying, let's unfold this. One of the drivers in this particular state or a particular metro area is public safety. I live in Chicago. It's public safety. Let's not just put it up there as it's a driver for voters, but why is it? And then start to look at those issues and what the responses to those issues are. I think in applying solutions journalism, we're not only informing the public, we're educating them, and we're empowering them to make better informed decisions when they head to the polls.
That was extremely well put, and you spoke to some of the questions I'm going to be asking you. But we'll get to that. I want to ask you several follow-ups to that. But first, something that I've recently been thinking about a lot is that solutions journalism doesn't really require journalists to learn any new skills. They can bring what they already know to the table, but it does require them to rethink the role they play and what their job is, like what they're trying to accomplish. And that's the biggest difference, right? What the actual goal is. So for journalists that are tackling this, that are taking this course, that, like the idea of solutions journalism, but are trying, everything they have been taught, everything they've been expected to do is report on problems. What's your advice to journalists that are trying to wrap their head around this? Do you have any tips for people, for journalists facing that, tackling that challenge?
Yeah, look, I think it's easy to say, harder to do, but we have to unlearn what we've learned. And I remember back in 2021, the first fellowship that the Latino News Network and myself were fortunate to participate in, and it was very transformative for me. You're right. It wasn't as if I was being taught anything new. It was just how things were being organized, and really given the time to understand how I had been trained to put things together, as opposed to thinking about those four crucial pillars. So it's not really about reinventing the wheel. A lot of these experiences and expertise the journalists already have. It's about how you organize them. It's also about changing the narrative, and in doing so, chipping away at the newsroom culture. We as journalists are always looking to question authority, question the status quo in our reporting, and in our constitutional responsibility to hold the powerful accountable. But we seldom do that internally. We seldom do that in our newsrooms. Many newsrooms are playing off of a playbook that hasn't changed in over 50 years. Why is that? Why? And you have to ask yourself, why is that? Especially in newsrooms that, statistically speaking, and using my cap as a former president of the National Association of Hispanic Journalists, we know is lacking in diversity. And so when we start to use our reporting hats and use it internally and ask the right questions, we allow ourselves the opportunity to chip away at what has been the standard and really look to think about what's the next evolution of our newsroom, the next evolution of journalism, and how do we best serve the public. I learned through SJN that it's churning a top-down approach that often mainstream media is criticized for. This elitist journalist, better educated, telling you what you need to know, and flipping that around and listening to the public and being very present to what they're looking from their journalists, their newsrooms, and having that approach. And in doing so, we started to see the public as more than just an audience, but contributors to what we were discussing in regards to stories we're choosing to do, how we do them, and how we deliver them.
And you talked about this moment, and I wanted to, for a second, just acknowledge that journalism is in crisis. I don't know a single journalist who's not, facing layoffs, with newsrooms are closing, ad revenues cratering. There's anti-democratic political movements in the U.S. and around the world. And so talk more about, as journalism has to reimagine itself, has to often do more with fewer resources. What role can solutions journalism play in this reimagination? And you've already began to address that, but talk a little bit more about, this moment for journalism and what the next evolution can look like.
Yeah. Look, as someone who's been around the block a couple of times, I'm a 30-plus year news veteran. I've seen a lot of change. A lot of that change has come through technology and this rush to first be first, then first be right. And it's that drive is really driven by the business end. Yes, this is a business. Yes, we have commercials. Yes, we need to get paid. That's all important, but it can't be the North Star of a newsroom. When a newsroom, and I've been in those newsrooms, when they spend more time about making editorial decisions that are more about what's going to move the needle in regards to ratings or likes or clicks, instead of digging deep and having discussions and debates about fair and accuracy, something's wrong. And so solutions journalism provides us the tools, and that was in large part the focus of the MOOC that I produced, in how solutions journalism helps us engage with the audience and repair some of the damage that has been done in that relationship, because it focuses on transparency. There's no issue in the reporting that I do and others do when they apply solutions journalism, because the story tells itself. I'm not concerned about a story being good or bad, positive or negative. My concern is in telling the truth. And by applying solutions journalism and being transparent about news gathering and how that story is being put together, the audience might not all agree, with the findings, but what they won't disagree is with the facts. And that's what's most important. That's our bread and butter. That's our currency. We don't, build jet engines. We tell stories, and we have to jealously guard the work that we do in regards to adhering to the highest standards of journalism, because once we get it wrong, it takes twice as much, 5 times as much, to gain back the trust of the public.
And something I've noticed, talking to journalists, talking to newsrooms, is that conceptually, just it's challenging for journalists that are trying to do solutions journalism to consider how other communities can offer lessons. Whether they're successes or failures. It seems to be like a mental block. I can't exactly explain why this is, but do you have any recommendations for journalists that are struggling because their community doesn't have a solution or their community isn't trying something new? What would you recommend so they can start the process of looking to see what they can learn from other communities that they can bring to their audience?
Yeah. One of the things that solutions journalism teaches is to not just look myopically where you are. Again, I mentioned I'm in Chicago, and Chicago, like any major metropolitan area, has its shares of challenges. And so one of the stories that we often cover here in Chicago is gun violence. Now, gun violence isn't unique to Chicago, although by comparison with New York and LA, it has a larger issue. But if the focus of reporting under the umbrella of we're a local news entity is strictly about the communities that are under the thumb of gun violence, the elected officials that are looking to solve those problems along with the community, if all we're doing is just looking at this particular area, we're not lending ourselves to finding answers, best practices, and lessons learned elsewhere. So when we're producing a gun violence story, it behooves us to do some research. That part of the research that we do isn't just about what has been done in the city of Chicago, in Cook County, or in the state of Illinois, but look at other places, comparable places that have the same issue and what their responses were, so that when we then produce our stories and are talking to elected officials and we're talking to community leaders, we're asking questions based on some of the things that have worked and haven't worked elsewhere. And a lot of times when we engage in that conversation, there are aha moments for those people who said, I did not know that, or I heard about that, but had not considered it for us here in Chicago or for Cook County. It is our job not to just report announcements, or to be a megaphone for elected officials, community leaders, and be a platform of discussion of what we should do or should try to do. It should also be about what we have done. And part of what we have done, those responses, is to look elsewhere and ask those questions that might spark ideas about some of the things on the table that they're looking to propose and they're looking to produce. I think that differentiates the journalist and the news outlet. In a market like Chicago, where you have television, print, radio fighting for the attention of that audience, what better way to differentiate yourself as a journalist and from a business perspective than applying Solutions Journalism Network teachings to making yourself be different.
And I'm glad you brought up the issue of gun violence, because even though we are in this MOOC is about election coverage, the issue of violence and crime is in many areas a top. I live in Baltimore. That's a top issue. Public safety is a top issue in the election. So it's important that journalists, as you said, go beyond what candidate X and candidate Y are saying and actually look for evidence and ask, you can ask candidates, where is there evidence that what you're proposing has worked before? That's something I've been talking to journalists about. Like you have that power in a very simple and profound way. But on this topic, you recently spoke out about a need to change how journalists approach the crime beat, the violence beat. It tends to be overwhelmingly negative, but it could be. It's also possible to report this through the lens of public safety, and we know that America has a propensity to incarceration and to these punitive measures to crime, but My question would be, where is there evidence that this has succeeded? We do have the highest incarceration rate in the world, but we're not safer than other societies with less incarceration. But so this would require transformation. It's easy for me to say this, but what would this transformation look like in terms of reporting on issues such as this, and where should journalists start?
Yeah, look, I think as you mentioned. We're in an election year, and one of the things that perpetually happens is a focus on what's driving voters to the polls. And a lot of those issues are the social determinants of health, including public safety, as you've mentioned. And when it comes to gun violence, again, here in Chicago, to be constructively critical, but I think the same applies to other major metropolitan areas, there's an overemphasis on the covering the shootings and not even doing a good job of that. There's this almost daily feed, it seems, on the latest shootings, and they overwhelmingly are reported the location in regards to specific addresses sometimes. And here in the city of Chicago, when you do that over and over and over again, it creates a false reality that gun violence is specific to an area in Chicago. And then when you look at the demographics of that area, you're saying that this is an issue that only affects Black and Brown communities. So now your coverage that I'll for the purposes of this example, have a glass half full, there are good intentions, and shedding light to this problem becomes exploitative of the people that are most vulnerable. So you're failing. You're failing as a journalist in your job of telling a story fairly and accurately. You need to take a step back, and you need to not only shed the light about the problem, but also invest the time in the responses to correct those problems. And in doing so, you're going to find a lot of stories from the community, from electeds, of how they're lifting themselves up. Stories that provide hope to an issue. But what happens is, because of this continuous focus on just 20 seconds, 15 seconds, 30 seconds the most about the latest shooting, it creates a false truth, not only in Chicago, but everywhere else. So that it then becomes this false narrative that others use to ding Chicago. When I moved to Chicago 4 years ago, my family thought I was crazy because they thought Chicago was like just a shooting range. Bullets were flying left and right, and of course that's not the case. But that type of stereotype is built on some truth, and the truth is the consistency in producing those types of stories.
And we've covered a lot of ground here, and I think you've made a compelling argument about why journalists, why and how they can start taking this different approach and looking at the whole story instead of just all the things that are going wrong, which, it's something that we've been trained to do. So it's something, as you said, we need to unlearn. So I want to end with a question for you about for journalists that are taking this course and that may have taken your course and want to do this type of reporting in this pivotal election year. What are some stories you want to see, and where should journalists go to start start getting story ideas and start even developing beats this year? Or what would you recommend to them to start thinking about now as we are going through the primaries and heading towards the general?
Yeah, look, a lot of resources on the Solutions Journalism Network website. I mean, there are examples of solutions journalism reporting. There are different tools, the toolkit that really can walk you through not only what solutions journalism is, but other aspects of solutions journalism. The NICE Center for Journalism in the Americas is also a great resource that has those same types of educational resources. My biggest advice for my fellow journalists is to take a step back. I again, very fortunate to be part of SJN and have been benefited a lot from the fellowships. One of them was Democracy SOS. And that was another transformative time for me and our newsrooms, because we stopped covering politics and started covering democracy. In this election year, fight the status quo of using our platform, whether it's television, radio, digital, print, as a megaphone for the candidates to control the message, right? To use it to tell their narrative. Instead, use the platform, which is a privilege to have, in covering democracy, in really diving into those social determinants of health that are perpetually the drivers to the polls, and spend some time talking to voters and community about what that is, and then collecting that. Arm yourself with the questions for the candidates. If all you're doing is taking quotes and sound bites from the electeds, this is it's a tailored speech meant to communicate what they want to communicate, and that's okay. But it's our job to ask the questions, and if we are not preparing ourselves to ask the right questions by engaging with the community that we serve, then we're no better than a public relations agency in helping amplify the message that they're crafting and they want out there.
Hugo Balta, thank you so much for joining us. If people watching this want to keep following your work, can you leave us with where they should go to keep up with your work and what you're producing and the trainings you're producing as well?
Yes, I'm always happy to engage with individuals and groups in regards to solutions journalism and diversity, equity, and inclusion, and that intersection of journalism and DE&I. You can find me anywhere on social media at Hugo Balta, HUGO B as in boy, ALTA. Happy to engage with you.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.